The fall before the rise. Keanu Reeves had seen his fair share of betrayals, heartbreaks, and life's cruel twists. But nothing could have prepared him for the sheer arrogance of corporate greed. He had entered the world of technology not as an investor looking for profit, but as a man passionate about making a difference in the lives of others. He believed technology had the power to heal, to uplift, and to connect, values he held close to his heart. For years, Keanu had been deeply involved in Neuralink Dynamics, a promising AI-driven startup working on cutting-edge mental health solutions. It wasn't about money for him. He'd already earned enough in Hollywood. His mission was personal. He had lost too many people he cared about to mental health struggles, and if technology could be used to prevent such tragedies, he wanted to be at the forefront of it. When Neuralink Dynamics first began, it was a tight-knit group of passionate individuals working toward a common goal: creating AI-driven therapy assistants to provide free, accessible mental health support for people who couldn't afford traditional therapy. It was a noble cause, one that had attracted Keanu's attention immediately. He didn't just invest his money, he invested his time, his energy, and most importantly, his heart. But everything changed when Richard Langston took over as CEO. Richard was a different breed, a corporate shark who believed that business was war and that kindness was a weakness. He had a reputation for turning struggling startups into billion-dollar empires, but his methods were ruthless. He saw Keanu not as a contributor, but as a liability. In Richard's eyes, Keanu was just a Hollywood actor playing philanthropist, a sentimental fool who didn't understand the cutthroat nature of Silicon Valley. The tension had been brewing for months. Keanu had pushed for ethical AI development, emphasizing accessibility and empathy. Richard, on the other hand, saw dollar signs. He wanted to pivot the company's focus from mental health accessibility to high-end AI therapy services for the elite, exclusive programs only available to the wealthy. Keanu pushed back. Richard didn't like that. The meeting that changed everything. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension. Everyone in the company had heard rumors of a shift in leadership, but no one had expected things to come to a head so suddenly. Keanu sat at the far end of the long glass conference table, his demeanor calm but alert. He wasn't dressed in a power suit like the rest of the executives. Instead, he wore his signature black shirt, jeans, and worn-out boots. He had never cared for the pretenses of wealth and power. To him, actions mattered more than appearances. Richard stood at the front of the room, pacing like a wolf about to pounce on its prey. His expensive watch glinted under the fluorescent lights as he placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. "Let's cut to the chase," Richard said, his voice dripping with forced civility. "We need to realign Neuralink Dynamics with a more sustainable vision. The reality is, the mental health AI sector isn't as profitable as we'd hoped. At least, not with the approach we've been taking." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "You mean the approach of actually helping people?" Richard exhaled sharply through his nose, clearly irritated. "Helping people is great, Keanu. But let's be real. This is a business. If we don't pivot, we're going to get buried by competitors who understand the value of exclusivity." Keanu leaned forward, his dark eyes piercing. "Exclusivity. We started this company to make mental health care accessible. You want to turn it into a luxury product for the elite." Richard smirked. "And what's wrong with that? The rich will always pay for premium services. We can scale up, go global, and dominate the market." The room was silent. Many of the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They respected Keanu, but they also feared Richard. He had a history of making people disappear from companies if they got in his way. Keanu let out a slow breath. "I didn't join this company to build a gold-plated prison for the wealthy," he said softly. "I joined because I believe technology should serve humanity, not exploit it." Richard straightened up, the smirk never leaving his face. "That's exactly why you don't belong here anymore." A murmur rippled through the boardroom. Keanu sat still, absorbing the weight of the words. "I'm sorry, Keanu," Richard continued. though there was no trace of remorse in his voice. But we need someone who understands the business side of things. Your passion is admirable, but it's not practical. Effective immediately, you're being relieved of your position on the board. Silence. The air grew heavier. Keanu's face remained unreadable. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even flinch. He simply nodded. "All right," he said quietly. Richard blinked, almost as if he had expected a bigger reaction. That's it. No dramatic speech. No fight. Keanu stood up, gathering his papers. There's no point in fighting a man who's already lost and doesn't realize it. Richard's smirk wavered. "Excuse me." Keanu looked at him for a long moment, then reached out his hand. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Richard." Richard stared at the outstretched hand before scoffing. "Spare me the theatrics." Keanu withdrew his hand, gave a small nod to the rest of the board, and walked out of the room without another word. As the door shut behind him, the employees sitting outside in the open office area looked up from their work, confusion and concern on their faces. Word traveled fast in a place like this. By the time Keanu reached the elevator, half the company already knew what had happened. A young intern, barely in her 20s, stood near the entrance, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. She had recorded the entire conversation, and within hours, the video would go viral. The world reacts. The internet exploded. Hashtag justice for Keanu. Hashtag Keanu deserves better. Hashtag Neuralink expose. Social media platforms were flooded with outrage. The general public adored Keanu Reeves, not just for his movies, but for the genuine kindness he showed in real life. Seeing him publicly humiliated and dismissed so callously didn't sit well with millions of people. Celebrities, tech leaders, and mental health advocates all weighed in. People who had benefited from Neuralink Dynamics' free AI therapy services shared their stories, emphasizing how Keanu's vision had changed their lives. Meanwhile, Neuralink Dynamics found itself in the eye of a PR storm. Investors began questioning the company's new direction. Users started boycotting its products. Employees resigned in protest. Richard Langston had expected a clean break. He had underestimated the power of integrity. Keanu's next move. While the world raged on his behalf, Keanu remained silent. He wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in building something better. And so, with the help of the very people Richard had cast aside, Keanu began working on a new project, one that would not only rival Neuralink Dynamics, but would redefine the future of AI in mental health. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The ripple effect. The boardroom doors had barely closed behind Keanu Reeves when the ripple began. For the employees of Neuralink Dynamics, the dismissal of Keanu wasn't just a business decision. It was a betrayal. Keanu wasn't your typical investor who showed up for quarterly meetings, nodded at the numbers, and disappeared until the next financial report. He was present. He remembered birthdays, asked about family members, and even took time to mentor junior developers who were struggling. He treated everyone, from the janitor to the CTO, with the same quiet respect. To see him dismissed so publicly, so callously, left a bitter taste in the mouths of many. But the real storm was brewing far beyond the sleek glass walls of the company. The viral storm. Within hours, the video of Keanu's dismissal, captured discreetly by a young intern named Mia, found its way to social media. She hadn't intended to record it at first, just a habit of taking notes during important meetings. But when Richard Langston's condescending tone echoed across the boardroom, her instincts kicked in. She uploaded the video anonymously, never imagining the wildfire it would ignite. By the time the sun set over Silicon Valley, hashtags like hashtag justice for Keanu, hashtag Neuralink expose, and hashtag Keanu deserves better were trending worldwide. The footage showed Keanu's composed, gracious demeanor contrasted against Richard's smug arrogance. It was a masterclass in humility meeting hubris. But it wasn't just the public who noticed. The media frenzy. News outlets jumped on the story like sharks sensing blood in the water. Headlines flooded the internet. Hollywood star fired from tech startup. But wait until you see his response. Keanu Reeves, the actor who cared more about mental health than profits. Arrogant CEO fires Keanu Reeves. Backlash ensues. Talk shows dissected every frame of the video, analyzing Keanu's serene reaction and Richard's dismissive smirk. Mental health advocates rallied behind Keanu, emphasizing how his vision had shaped Neuralink Dynamics into more than just a tech company. It had become a symbol of accessible mental health care for those in need. Meanwhile, Richard Langston became the face of corporate greed. His photos were splashed across media platforms, memes mocking his decision flooded Twitter, and investors started to get cold feet. The corporate fallout. At first, Richard tried to weather the storm. He released a carefully crafted statement filled with corporate jargon, attempting to justify Keanu's dismissal as a strategic realignment to better position the company for future growth. But the damage was done. High-profile investors, many of whom had backed Neuralink Dynamics because of Keanu's involvement, began pulling out. They hadn't invested in Richard's profit-driven vision. They had invested in Keanu's authenticity. The company's user base started to dwindle. Mental health professionals who had partnered with Neuralink Dynamics withdrew their support, criticizing the company's new direction as exploitative and unethical. Employees, disillusioned by the company's betrayal, began resigning en masse. Some even shared their own stories online, detailing how Keanu's empathy had created a positive work culture that Richard was now dismantling. Within a month, Neuralink Dynamics stock plummeted. What was once a rising star in Silicon Valley was now a cautionary tale of what happens when greed outweighs integrity. Keanu's silence and his plan. While the world watched Neuralink Dynamics implode, Keanu remained silent. He didn't post statements. He didn't give interviews. He didn't retaliate. Instead, he got to work. Keanu wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in solutions. He knew that the mental health crisis didn't pause because of corporate drama. People still needed help, perhaps now more than ever. And he wasn't going to let Richard's greed stand in the way of that. With the support of several former Neuralink Dynamics employees who had resigned in protest, Keanu began quietly assembling a team. Developers, mental health professionals, and ethical AI experts, all of them passionate about the same mission Keanu had championed from the beginning, making mental health care accessible to everyone. They called it Eunoia Tech, derived from the Greek word meaning beautiful thinking. But this wasn't just a company. It was a movement. Building Eunoia Tech. While Richard scrambled to salvage his crumbling empire, Keanu and his team worked tirelessly, pouring their hearts and souls into Eunoia Tech. The goal wasn't just to replicate what Neuralink Dynamics had been. It was to surpass it. They envisioned an AI platform that could provide free mental health resources to underserved communities, schools, and even disaster-stricken areas where therapy wasn't readily available. Unlike Richard's profit-driven model, Eunoia Tech operated as a non-profit. Keanu invested a significant portion of his own fortune to fund the initial development, but the project soon attracted donations from philanthropists, celebrities, and even tech moguls who believed in the cause. What set Eunoia Tech apart wasn't just its technology, it was the human touch. The AI wasn't designed to replace therapists, but to supplement and support them, providing people with immediate empathetic responses when they needed it most. The platform launched quietly, without fanfare or press releases, but word spread fast. The unexpected impact. Within weeks, Eunoia Tech was making headlines, not because Keanu had created it, but because of the lives it was changing. Stories poured in from around the world. A teenager in rural India who finally had access to mental health resources, a veteran in the U.S. who found comfort in the AI's supportive conversations, a single mother in Brazil who used the platform to manage her anxiety. The media caught wind, and soon, Eunoia Tech was the subject of every major news outlet. But this time, the focus wasn't on corporate drama. It was on the positive impact of technology when guided by compassion. Keanu still refused interviews, letting the work speak for itself, but his silence only fueled the public's admiration. He wasn't doing this for recognition. He was doing it because he cared. Richard's realization. Back at Neuralink Dynamics, Richard watched in growing frustration as Unoya Tech soared. His company was in freefall. Investors had abandoned ship, partnerships had dissolved, and the public's trust was beyond repair. But what stung the most wasn't the financial loss. It was seeing Keanu succeed without ever stooping to Richard's level. There were no lawsuits, no public feuds, no smear campaigns. Keanu had simply moved forward, proving that integrity and kindness could achieve more than greed ever could. For the first time in his career, Richard felt something unfamiliar: regret. A new chapter begins. As Unoya Tech continued to grow, Keanu's story became more than just a viral moment. It became a symbol of resilience, compassion, and the power of staying true to one's values. But this was just the beginning. Keanu had more to give. The world needed more than just a viral hero. It needed a revolution in how technology served humanity. And Keanu Reeves was ready to lead the charge. The comeback blueprint. Keanu Reeves had always believed that setbacks were merely setups for comebacks. Life had thrown him curveballs before, losing loved ones, facing personal tragedies, and navigating the often treacherous waters of Hollywood. But this time, it felt different. The sting of being dismissed from Neuralink Dynamics wasn't just about personal pride. It was about the mission, the people who depended on the technology, and the integrity of the work. While Richard Langston basked in his short-lived triumph, Keanu was quietly drafting a new blueprint, not just for a company, but for a revolution in how technology could heal and empower. The seed of an idea. In the weeks following his dismissal, Keanu retreated to his modest home in the Hollywood Hills. The media frenzy continued to swirl around him, but he remained undistracted. He spent his days reading, reflecting, and meeting with trusted friends and advisors in the tech and mental health communities. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed his home in golden light, Keanu sat in his quiet study, flipping through an old, worn notebook where he jotted down ideas over the years. His mind drifted back to a conversation he had with a friend who struggled with anxiety and depression. "I just wish there was something out there that felt human. Like, I know apps and hotlines exist, but they always feel so clinical, so robotic. Sometimes, I just need to feel heard." Those words echoed in his mind. What if there was a way to make technology feel truly empathetic? Not just a series of pre-programmed responses, but an AI that could understand, adapt, and genuinely support people emotionally. What if mental health support wasn't limited by geography, language, or financial means? That's when the vision for Unoya Tech crystallized. Building the dream team. Keanu knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed people who shared his vision, who believed in technology as a force for good rather than just a means to profit. Word spread quickly through his network, and soon former Neuralink Dynamics employees who had resigned in protest began reaching out. These were people who had seen firsthand how Keanu's leadership had shaped a company culture based on empathy and innovation. They wanted in. Among them was Dr. Elena Ramirez, a renowned AI ethicist who had clashed with Richard Langston over his plans to monetize mental health data. She had left Neuralink Dynamics disillusioned, but found renewed hope in Keanu's new venture. There was also Samir Patel, a brilliant software engineer who had been one of the original architects of Neuralink Dynamics' AI framework. He admired Keanu's humility and was eager to work in an environment where ethical considerations weren't just an afterthought. And then there was Mia, the young intern whose video had inadvertently sparked the viral movement. Keanu reached out to her personally, offering her a full-time position on the team. She was hesitant at first, feeling guilty for the chaos the video had caused, but Keanu reassured her. "You didn't cause the chaos," he said gently. "You revealed the truth. And the truth has power. More than a company. From the very beginning, Humiliates was different. It wasn't structured like a traditional tech startup. There were no flashy launch parties, no aggressive marketing campaigns. The focus was on the mission, creating an AI platform that could provide free, accessible, and empathetic mental health support to people around the world. Keanu poured a significant portion of his own wealth into funding the project. But it wasn't just about money. He dedicated his time, energy, and even his Hollywood connections to ensure the success of Humiliates. Celebrities, philanthropists, and even other tech entrepreneurs began to take notice, offering support and resources. The team operated out of a modest office space in Los Angeles, a far cry from the glass and steel towers of Silicon Valley. The walls were adorned with inspirational quotes, photos of the team members' families, and notes from people who had been positively impacted by their previous work at Neuralink Dynamics. It was a constant reminder of why they were doing what they were doing. The technology behind the mission. The cornerstone of Humiliates was its flagship product, Humiliates. Unlike traditional AI therapy bots, Humiliates wasn't designed to replace human therapists, but to act as a bridge for those who didn't have immediate access to professional help. The AI was built with advanced natural language processing capabilities, but what set it apart was its empathy algorithm, a groundbreaking feature that allowed it to detect emotional cues not just from words, but from tone, context, and even pauses in conversation. The team also integrated multilingual support, ensuring that people from different cultural backgrounds could access the platform in their native languages. They partnered with mental health professionals worldwide to ensure cultural sensitivity and accuracy in the AI's responses. But the most revolutionary aspect of Humiliates was its accessibility. The platform was completely free, funded through donations and grants. It was designed to work on low-bandwidth networks, making it accessible in remote and underserved regions. For people without smartphones, there was even an SMS-based version of the AI, ensuring that no one was left behind. The soft launch. Keanu didn't want a grand unveiling. He believed in letting the work speak for itself. Humiliates quietly launched the beta version of Humiliates on a small scale, targeting communities that were most in need, rural areas with limited mental health resources, refugee camps, and inner-city schools. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Stories began to pour in from people whose lives had been touched by Humiliates. A young girl in a remote village in Kenya found solace in late-night conversations with the AI, helping her cope with the trauma of losing her parents. A veteran in rural Montana used the platform to manage his PTSD when the nearest VA clinic was hours away. A teenager in Tokyo, struggling with anxiety and isolation, found a friend in Humiliates who listened without judgment. These stories began to circulate on social media, not through marketing campaigns, but through genuine word of mouth. People were sharing how Humiliates had helped them in their darkest moments. The media discovers Humiliates. It didn't take long for the media to catch on. Journalists who had covered Keanu's firing from Neuralink Dynamics were quick to pick up on his new venture. But what they discovered wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a story of resilience, innovation, and the power of staying true to one's values. Keanu Reeves' new tech company is changing lives, and it's not about the money. From Hollywood to humanity, how Keanu Reeves is using AI to heal the world. Humiliates, the free mental health tool the world desperately needed. Unlike the coverage of Neuralink Dynamics, the media's focus wasn't on corporate drama, but on the tangible impact of Humiliates' work. Keanu, true to form, declined most interview requests, preferring to let his team and the people they were helping take center stage. The public's response. The public's response was nothing short of phenomenal. Social media was flooded with testimonials from people who had used Humiliates. Mental health professionals praised the platform for its thoughtful design and ethical approach. Even prominent figures in the tech world, who had remained neutral during the Neuralink Dynamics debacle, publicly expressed their admiration for Keanu's work. But perhaps the most surprising response came from within Silicon Valley itself. Competing tech companies began reevaluating their own practices, realizing that there was a growing demand for ethical, accessible technology. Keanu's quiet revolution was inspiring change far beyond the walls of Tech. Richard Langston watches from the sidelines. Meanwhile, Richard Langston watched in growing frustration as Tech flourished. Neuralink Dynamics was in freefall. Investors had pulled out, clients had canceled contracts, and the company's reputation was in tatters. Richard had tried to pivot, rebrand, and even launch his own mental health initiatives, but it was too late. The public saw through his efforts as nothing more than shallow attempts to regain favor. But what stung the most wasn't the financial loss. It was seeing Keanu succeed without ever engaging in the corporate mudslinging Richard had expected. Keanu's quiet, unwavering commitment to his values had proven more powerful than any PR campaign Richard could muster. The blueprint for the future. As Tech continued to grow, Keanu and his team began expanding their vision. They started exploring partnerships with schools, hospitals, and nonprofits to integrate AI into existing support systems. They developed new features tailored to specific needs, such as crisis intervention for natural disaster victims and specialized support for marginalized communities. But Keanu wasn't done. He envisioned a future where technology didn't just support mental health but fostered global empathy. A world where AI could bridge cultural divides, promote understanding, and create a sense of community in an increasingly disconnected world. And with Tech, he was well on his way to making that vision a reality. The turning point. Months had passed since Tech quietly launched its revolutionary AI mental health platform, AI. What started as a humble endeavor, born from the ashes of Keanu Reeves' dismissal at Neuralink Dynamics, had grown into a global movement. The AI wasn't just a tool, it was a lifeline for countless people around the world. Its impact resonated far beyond the tech sphere, seeping into communities, homes, and hearts. But as Tech soared to unimaginable heights, the shadow of Neuralink Dynamics loomed in the background, teetering on the brink of collapse. Richard Langston, once hailed as a Silicon Valley prodigy, found himself grappling with a reality he had never anticipated. His empire was crumbling, and the man he thought he'd humiliated was now leading a revolution in ethical technology. The world was changing, and the battle lines were drawn, not in courtrooms or boardrooms, but in the hearts and minds of people across the globe. The global impact of AI. By now, AI wasn't just a name whispered among tech enthusiasts or mental health advocates. It was a household name. The platform's reach extended to over 100 countries, translated into 50 languages, and adapted to various cultural contexts to ensure that its support was both sensitive and effective. In rural communities across Africa and Asia, AI provided critical mental health support where there were no therapists or psychologists for miles. In war-torn regions like Syria and Ukraine, refugees used the platform to cope with trauma and loss. In bustling cities like New York, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo, overwhelmed professionals and students found solace in late-night conversations with the empathetic AI. But AI wasn't just about individuals, it was transforming institutions. Schools integrated the platform into their counseling systems, offering students an anonymous way to seek help without fear of judgment. Hospitals used AI to provide preliminary mental health screenings, freeing up overburdened healthcare workers. Even disaster response teams partnered with Tech to deploy the AI in crisis zones, offering immediate emotional support to victims of natural disasters. The testimonials were overwhelming. A teenage girl in rural India wrote about how AI helped her manage her anxiety and gave her the confidence to pursue her education despite societal pressures. A veteran in the U.S. Midwest credited the AI with helping him navigate the dark days of PTSD when he felt too ashamed to seek human help. A single mother in Brazil found daily encouragement from AI to balance work, parenting, and her personal mental health struggles. These stories weren't just shared online. They were featured in documentaries, news segments, and even academic journals studying the positive impact of AI on global mental health. The decline of Neuralink dynamics. While Eunoia Tech thrived, Neuralink dynamics spiraled into chaos. The once promising startup, heralded as the future of AI-driven mental health, had become a cautionary tale of greed and mismanagement. Richard Langston's aggressive pivot toward exclusive, high-cost AI therapy services backfired spectacularly. The public backlash following Keanu's dismissal had damaged the company's reputation beyond repair. Mental health professionals distanced themselves from the brand, criticizing its unethical practices and blatant disregard for accessibility. Investors pulled out one by one, citing not just financial instability but also moral disagreements with the company's direction. Richard tried to stem the bleeding with rebranding efforts, but it was too late. The name Neuralink Dynamics had become synonymous with corporate greed and exploitation. Internally, the company was a mess. Employee morale was at an all-time low. Talented engineers and developers had jumped ship, many of them finding their way to Eunoia Tech, where they could work with purpose and integrity. Those who remained at Neuralink Dynamics did so out of necessity, not loyalty, and the toxic work environment reflected that. Desperate to salvage his empire, Richard began seeking out new investors and partners. But the once open doors of Silicon Valley were now firmly shut. No one wanted to associate with a sinking ship captained by a man whose arrogance had alienated both the public and the industry. An unexpected reunion. The turning point came at the Global Tech for Good Summit in San Francisco, a prestigious annual event where innovators from around the world gathered to showcase technology aimed at making a positive impact. Keanu, despite his usual aversion to the spotlight, had been invited to deliver the keynote address. His team at Eunoia Tech had convinced him that it was an opportunity to share their mission with an even broader audience. Richard Langston, on the other hand, attended the summit out of desperation. He saw it as a last-ditch effort to attract investors and restore Neuralink Dynamics' credibility. He hadn't expected Keanu to be there, let alone be the keynote speaker. The massive conference hall was filled with thousands of attendees, tech moguls, innovators, journalists, and young entrepreneurs eager to learn from the industry's best. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation as Keanu took the stage, dressed in his usual understated style, a simple black blazer over a t-shirt and jeans. As he approached the podium, the crowd erupted into applause. But Keanu, ever humble, raised a hand to quiet them. He wasn't here for fanfare. He was here to share a message, a vision for the future. Keanu's voice, calm and steady, echoed through the hall. Technology has always been a double-edged sword, he began. It can isolate us or bring us closer together. It can exploit or empower. It's not the technology itself that defines its impact. It's the people behind it. The choices we make. He spoke about Eunoia Tech, but not in a way that boasted of its success. Instead, he focused on the lives it had touched, the stories of resilience and hope that the AI had helped foster. When we started Eunoia Tech, our goal wasn't to disrupt markets or dominate the tech industry. Our goal was simple: to help, to reach the people who are too often left behind. Technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. As Keanu continued, the audience hung on every word. His sincerity was palpable, a stark contrast to the rehearsed pitches that usually filled such conferences. He didn't need flashy slides or buzzwords. His words resonated because they came from the heart. In the back of the hall, Richard Langston sat in stunned silence. The man he had dismissed as an actor playing businessman was now standing before the world, not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a visionary leader. The applause that followed Keanu's speech wasn't just polite. It was thunderous, heartfelt, and genuine. The aftermath of the summit. Keanu's speech became the highlight of the summit, covered extensively by media outlets worldwide. Headlines praised his vision and the impact of Eunoia Tech, further cementing the company's reputation as a beacon of ethical innovation. But something unexpected happened in the days following the summit. Richard Langston, for the first time, felt the weight of genuine regret, not just for the financial losses or the crumbling of his company, but for the realization that he had been on the wrong side of something much bigger than himself. He had dismissed Keanu because he couldn't see past his own ego, blinded by the belief that success was measured in profits and power. He watched interview after interview, read countless testimonials from people whose lives had been changed by AI, and for the first time in his career, he questioned everything he thought he knew about leadership, innovation, and purpose. A crossroads for Richard. Back in his now half-empty office at Neuralink Dynamics, Richard stared at his reflection in the glass walls. The same walls that once echoed with confidence and ambition, but now felt like a prison. The company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and there was no salvaging its reputation. But beyond the financial ruin, Richard grappled with a deeper question. What did he really want his legacy to be? In a rare moment of vulnerability, Richard reached out to Keanu. It wasn't a formal business inquiry or a veiled attempt to save face. It was an honest admission of his mistakes. The unlikely meeting. Keanu was surprised when he received Richard's message, but he wasn't the type to hold grudges. He agreed to meet, not out of spite or superiority, but out of curiosity and perhaps hope. They met in a quiet cafe far from the glitz of Silicon Valley. Richard looked different, his usual arrogance replaced by a humility Keanu hadn't seen before. "I was wrong," Richard admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see that now. I thought I understood what it meant to lead, to innovate. But I didn't. I was chasing the wrong things." Keanu listened quietly, his expression calm but thoughtful. "It's never too late to change," Keanu finally said. "But change starts with how you treat people, not how much money you make." The conversation wasn't long, but it was transformative. Richard left with a new perspective, not just on business, but on life. A new beginning. In the months that followed, Neuralink Dynamics officially shut down, unable to recover from its tarnished reputation. But Richard Langston didn't disappear into obscurity. Inspired by Keanu's words and actions, he started his own nonprofit organization focused on providing mental health resources to underserved communities, this time with integrity and humility at its core. Meanwhile, Tech continued to thrive, expanding its reach and developing new innovations to further its mission of making mental health care accessible to all. And at the heart of it all was Keanu Reeves, the man who had turned a corporate betrayal into a global movement of compassion, resilience, and hope. The unexpected reunion. Years had passed since Keanu Reeves had been unceremoniously fired from Neuralink Dynamics, and the world had moved on, or so it seemed. Tech had become a symbol of ethical innovation, revolutionizing not just the tech industry, but how society viewed mental health. The once humble AI platform, AI, was now integrated into global healthcare systems, schools, and community outreach programs, providing support to millions. Meanwhile, Richard Langston had quietly faded into the background. The collapse of Neuralink Dynamics had been a public spectacle, but his journey after that was more private, more introspective. His meeting with Keanu at that quiet cafe had left a profound impact, one that would steer him down an unexpected path, a path that would eventually lead their worlds to collide again in ways neither of them could have anticipated. A global movement. By now, Tech wasn't just a company, it was a movement. The platform had expanded into over 150 countries, operating in 75 languages and dialects, adapting to cultural nuances to ensure that its mental health support was truly universal. Governments partnered with Tech to integrate AI into national healthcare systems, offering free 24/7 mental health support to citizens. In the developing world, AI became a vital resource for communities with limited access to traditional mental health services. In refugee camps across the Middle East and Africa, the AI provided comfort and coping strategies to those displaced by war and conflict. In inner-city schools from Los Angeles to Johannesburg, UNOAI became a trusted tool for students grappling with anxiety, bullying, and academic pressures. But Tech wasn't just limited to digital platforms. Keanu and his team launched Unoya Centers, physical spaces in underserved communities where people could access both AI-driven and human-led mental health resources. These centers became sanctuaries for those seeking support, blending technology with the human touch in a way that was both innovative and deeply compassionate. The media continued to spotlight Keanu's work, though he remained as humble and low-profile as ever. His focus was on the mission, not the recognition. But the world couldn't help but admire the man who had turned personal humiliation into a global force for good. Redemption through reflection. While Keanu's star rose, Richard Langston found himself on a very different journey. After the collapse of Neuralink Dynamics, he had retreated from the public eye, grappling with the fallout of his decisions. At first, his focus was on damage control, trying to salvage his reputation, attempting to launch new ventures. But nothing stuck. His name had become synonymous with greed and corporate arrogance. But the meeting with Keanu had planted a seed. Richard couldn't shake the words Keanu had said. "It's never too late to change, Richard. But change starts with how you treat people, not how much money you make." For the first time in his life, Richard began to reflect, not just on his career, but on his values, his motivations, and the legacy he wanted to leave behind. He realized that his pursuit of success had come at the expense of his integrity, relationships, and ultimately, his sense of purpose. He started small, volunteering at local mental health organizations, using his tech background to help nonprofits improve their digital infrastructure. Slowly, he began to rebuild, not his career, but himself. Eventually, Richard founded the Resilience Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing mental health resources to marginalized communities. But this time, he did things differently. He partnered with grassroots organizations, listened to the people he was trying to help, and ensured that his work was guided by empathy rather than profit. The foundation grew steadily, earning respect within the mental health community. Richard kept a low profile, never using his past fame or infamy as a marketing tool. He was no longer chasing recognition. He was chasing redemption. A chance encounter. The stage was set for their unexpected reunion at the Global Mental Health Summit in Geneva, Switzerland, an annual gathering of the world's leading mental health advocates, innovators, and policymakers. Tech was set to receive the Humanitarian Impact Award for its groundbreaking work in making mental health support accessible worldwide. Keanu, ever humble, had hesitated to attend, but his team insisted. Meanwhile, Richard had been invited to speak on a panel about the role of technology in community-based mental health initiatives. His work with the Resilience Foundation had garnered quiet respect, and the organizers saw value in his insights, though they had no idea of his past connection to Keanu. The moment of recognition. The Grand Hall of the Geneva Convention Center buzzed with anticipation. Delegates from around the world filled the space, eager to hear from the leading voices in mental health innovation. The event was a blend of polished professionals and passionate advocates, each with their own stories of struggle and triumph. Keanu arrived quietly, slipping into his seat near the front of the hall, dressed in his usual understated style. He wasn't here for the spotlight. He was here to support his team, who had worked tirelessly to make Tech what it was. As the keynote speeches began, Keanu listened attentively, nodding along to stories of resilience and hope. But his calm demeanor shifted slightly when the next speaker was announced. Please welcome Richard Langston, founder of the Resilience Foundation. Keanu's eyes widened ever so slightly. He hadn't expected to see Richard here, not after everything that had happened. But as Richard walked onto the stage, Keanu noticed something different. Gone was the smug, overconfident CEO he had once clashed with. Richard's posture was humbler, his expression softer. He looked like a man who had been through a journey, not just a professional failure, but of personal transformation. Richard began his speech, his voice steady but sincere. A few years ago, I was at the helm of a tech company that promised to revolutionize mental health. But I lost sight of what really mattered. I was focused on profits, not people. I made mistakes, big ones, and I hurt a lot of people in the process. But life has a way of teaching you lessons, sometimes the hard way. Keanu listened, his heart unexpectedly moved. This wasn't the Richard he remembered. This was a man who had learned, who had grown. Today, I stand before you not as a tech mogul, but as someone who understands the power of empathy, the importance of listening, and the value of second chances. Because in the end, that's what mental health is all about: resilience, growth, and the courage to change. The room erupted in applause, not the polite, obligatory kind, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. Keanu found himself clapping along, a small, knowing smile on his face. The reunion. After the panel, there was a reception in the convention hall's sprawling atrium. Delegates mingled, sharing stories and ideas over glasses of wine and trays of hors d'oeuvres. Keanu stood by a quiet corner, sipping on a glass of water, when he felt a presence beside him. Keanu. He turned to see Richard standing there, a cautious but hopeful look in his eyes. Richard. For a moment, there was silence. The weight of their shared history hung between them. But then Keanu broke the tension with a soft chuckle. Didn't expect to see you here. Richard smiled, a genuine, humble smile that Keanu hadn't seen before. I didn't expect to be here either. But life has a funny way of bringing you back to the things you tried to run from. Keanu nodded, his eyes reflecting understanding rather than judgment. Looks like you've come a long way. I still got a long way to go, Richard admitted. But thank you for what you said to me back then. It stuck with me. Keanu gave a small nod, his voice gentle. It's never too late to change. They stood there for a moment, two men who had once been adversaries, now connected by a shared understanding of failure, growth, and redemption. A new chapter together. In the months following their reunion, something unexpected happened. Keanu and Richard began to collaborate, not out of necessity, but out of a mutual respect for each other's journeys. Tech partnered with the Resilience Foundation to expand their reach even further, combining the power of cutting-edge technology with grassroots community initiatives. Together, they launched programs that blended AI-driven mental health support with human-led counseling, reaching even the most remote and underserved populations. Their partnership became a symbol, not just of professional collaboration, but of the transformative power of forgiveness, growth, and second chances. The legacy. Years later, when people spoke of Tech and the Resilience Foundation, they didn't just talk about technology or mental health. They talked about the story of two men, one an actor with a heart full of compassion, the other a businessman who learned the hard way what really mattered, who came together to change the world. And in the end, it wasn't just about AI or innovation. It was about the enduring power of kindness, resilience, and the belief that it's never too late to make a difference. The lesson learned. The partnership between Tech and the Resilience Foundation blossomed into something neither Keanu Reeves nor Richard Langston could have predicted. What had begun as two separate paths, one forged from compassion and the other from redemption, merged into a global movement that transcended technology and business. Together, they'd redefined how the world approached mental health, proving that even the deepest rivalries could evolve into powerful alliances. But beyond the accolades, beyond the headlines, and beyond the billions of lives touched, there was a deeper story. A story of personal growth, humility, and the lessons life teaches when we're willing to listen. This is the story of how Keanu and Richard not only changed the world, but also transformed themselves. The world takes notice. As Tech and the Resilience Foundation expanded their joint initiatives, their work caught the attention of global organizations, governments, and thought leaders. The United Nations invited them to speak at the World Mental Health Forum, and their programs became blueprints for mental health initiatives in over 80 countries. They weren't just addressing mental health at an individual level. They were influencing policy, reshaping educational systems, and even consulting with world leaders on integrating mental health resources into national infrastructure. Their work demonstrated that mental health was not a luxury. It was a human right. But while the world applauded their efforts, Keanu and Richard were on their own parallel journeys, learning lessons that no award or recognition could ever teach. The weight of leadership. Despite Humiliates' overwhelming success, Keanu often found himself grappling with the pressures of leadership. Unlike acting, where he could immerse himself in a role and then step back into his private life, leading a global mental health movement was a relentless, all-consuming responsibility. The very cause he championed, mental health, was starting to take a toll on his own well-being. He was constantly traveling, attending conferences, overseeing projects, and meeting with world leaders. But beneath his calm exterior, Keanu felt the weight of every decision, every project, and every life that Humiliates touched. One evening, after a long day of meetings in Geneva, Keanu sat alone in his hotel room, staring at the city lights. His mind raced with thoughts of upcoming projects, potential partnerships, and the never-ending stream of emails demanding his attention. For the first time in years, he felt overwhelmed. That's when he realized something profound. Even those who help others need help themselves. The next day, Keanu confided in his team. He admitted that he needed to step back, not from the mission, but from the day-to-day grind of leadership. It was a difficult decision, but it was also a testament to his own growth. Keanu had always preached the importance of mental health, and now he was living that truth by prioritizing his own well-being. He appointed Dr. Elena Ramirez, the AI ethicist who had been with Humiliates since the beginning, as the new CEO. Keanu remained involved as a visionary advisor, but allowed himself the space to breathe, reflect, and recharge. This decision not only preserved Keanu's mental health, but also reinforced the message that self-care isn't a weakness, it's a necessity. Facing the past. While Keanu was learning to balance leadership and self-care, Richard Langston faced a different challenge, reconciling with his past. Despite his work with the Resilience Foundation and his partnership with Humiliates, Richard couldn't escape the shadows of his former self. Every now and then, a news outlet would resurface his downfall at Neuralink Dynamics, reminding the world of his corporate arrogance and ethical failures. But it wasn't the media that haunted Richard. It was the people he had wronged along the way. Former employees, partners, and even friends who had been collateral damage in his ruthless climb to the top. Richard knew that true redemption required more than just good deeds. It required accountability. He began reaching out to the people he had hurt, not through public gestures or performative apologies, but through quiet, personal conversations. He listened to their grievances, acknowledged his mistakes, and, when possible, made amends. One of the most difficult conversations was with Samir Patel, the brilliant engineer who had been one of Neuralink Dynamics' original architects. Richard had dismissed Samir's ethical concerns in the past, leading to Samir's resignation and eventual move to Humiliates. When Richard approached him, he wasn't sure what to expect. But Samir, having seen Richard's transformation, agreed to meet. Their conversation was candid and emotional. "I was blinded by my own ambition," Richard admitted. "I didn't see the damage I was causing until it was too late. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I needed to say it." Samir paused for a moment before responding. "People can change, Richard, and you've proven that. But the real test isn't just acknowledging the past, it's how you move forward." Those words stuck with Richard, serving as both a validation of his progress and a reminder that redemption is an ongoing journey. The power of humility. As Keanu and Richard continued their work, they both embraced a deeper understanding of humility. Keanu, despite his fame and success, never allowed himself to become the face of Humiliates. He insisted that the spotlight be shared with his team, the communities they served, and the countless individuals who contributed to the mission. He believed that leadership wasn't about being at the front, it was about lifting others up. Richard, once a man driven by ego, learned to lead with empathy. He no longer saw leadership as control but as service. His experiences had taught him that true power lies not in dominance but in vulnerability, the ability to admit mistakes, seek growth, and connect with others on a human level. Together, they modeled a new kind of leadership, one rooted in integrity, compassion, and shared purpose. The Global Mental Health Pact. The culmination of their work came at the World Mental Health Congress in New York City, where Keanu and Richard were invited to co-present a groundbreaking initiative, the Global Mental Health Pact. This pact aimed to unite governments, corporations, and nonprofits in a collective commitment to make mental health care a universal human right. It proposed policy changes, funding initiatives, and international collaborations to ensure that mental health resources were accessible to everyone, regardless of geography, income, or background. As they stood together on the stage, addressing world leaders and global citizens, Keanu and Richard reflected on how far they had come, not just in their work, but in their personal journeys. Keanu spoke first, his voice steady and heartfelt. Mental health is not a luxury, it's a necessity, and it's our collective responsibility to ensure that no one is left behind. Technology can be a bridge, but it's our humanity that makes the real difference. Richard followed, his voice filled with humility and conviction. I've learned that success isn't measured by profits or accolades, but by the lives we touch and the change we inspire. This pact isn't just about policy. It's about people. It's about all of us. The room erupted in applause, not just for the pact, but for the story behind it. The story of two men who had turned conflict into collaboration and ambition into altruism. The lesson learned. In the end, the greatest lesson Keanu and Richard learned wasn't about technology, business, or even mental health. It was about the power of resilience, the importance of humility, and the transformative potential of kindness. They proved that even the most unlikely partnerships could create profound change when driven by shared values and a commitment to doing good. They showed the world that redemption is possible, that growth is continuous, and that leadership is about service, not status. But most importantly, they demonstrated that no matter how far we fall, it's never too late to rise, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us. The legacy. The story of Humiliates and the Resilience Foundation had become more than just a narrative about technology and mental health. It was a testament to the transformative power of empathy, the resilience of the human spirit, and the possibility of redemption. Keanu Reeves and Richard Langston, once adversaries in a corporate boardroom, had forged a partnership that not only changed their lives, but also left an indelible mark on the world. But as their journey reached its pinnacle, the question remained, what kind of legacy would they leave behind? The world they changed. By the time Humiliates celebrated its 10th anniversary, its impact was visible in every corner of the globe. The once small AI mental health platform had evolved into a multifaceted ecosystem of support, education, and advocacy. Humiliates' global reach. The platform was now integrated into healthcare systems in over 100 countries, offering free, real-time mental health support in more than 80 languages. It was accessible in remote villages in Africa, bustling cities in Asia, refugee camps in the Middle East, and underserved neighborhoods in the United States. The AI wasn't just a tool, it was a trusted companion, providing comfort, guidance, and hope to millions. Humiliates Centers. Physical Humiliates Centers had been established in over 50 countries, blending AI technology with human-led counseling. These centers became safe spaces for people to seek support without stigma or judgment. From school counseling programs in Tokyo to trauma recovery initiatives in war-torn regions, these centers were beacons of hope. Policy and advocacy. Keanu and Richard's work had influenced global mental health policy. The Global Mental Health Pact, launched at the World Mental Health Congress, led to legislative changes in dozens of countries, mandating mental health care as a fundamental human right. Their advocacy helped secure billions in funding for mental health initiatives worldwide. Education and awareness. Through partnerships with schools, universities, and community organizations, Unoya Tech developed educational programs that taught emotional intelligence, resilience, and mental health literacy from a young age. The stigma surrounding mental health began to dissolve as future generations grew up with the understanding that seeking help was a sign of strength, not weakness. Keanu's quiet legacy. For Keanu Reeves, the success of Unoya Tech was never about accolades or recognition. True to his nature, he remained in the background, allowing the work and the people it served to take center stage. But his influence was undeniable. The humble visionary. Keanu's name became synonymous with ethical innovation and compassionate leadership. He was invited to speak at universities, conferences, and global forums, though he often declined, preferring to let his team share the spotlight. When he did speak, his words resonated deeply, not because of his fame, but because of his authenticity. The personal impact. Keanu's humility and kindness inspired countless individuals, not just those who benefited from Unoya, but also those who worked alongside him. Employees described him as a leader who listened, who cared, and who led by example. His approach to leadership became a model for organizations worldwide, proving that compassion and success were not mutually exclusive. The unseen acts of kindness. Even as Unoya Tech grew, Keanu never lost touch with the simple acts of kindness that defined him. He continued to ride the subway, engage with fans, and donate anonymously to causes he believed in. His legacy wasn't just in the systems he built, but in the lives he touched quietly and without fanfare. Richard's redemption story. Richard Langston's transformation was one of the most remarkable aspects of this journey. From a corporate villain to a respected humanitarian, his story became a symbol of the power of change and redemption. The Resilience Foundation's growth. Under Richard's leadership, the Resilience Foundation became a global force in community-based mental health initiatives. The foundation focused on reaching the most marginalized populations, those who were often overlooked by traditional systems. From building mental health clinics in rural areas to launching mobile support units in disaster zones, the foundation's work complemented Unoya Tech's global reach. A new kind of leadership. Richard's approach to leadership shifted dramatically. No longer driven by ego or profit, he led with humility and empathy. He openly shared his story of failure and growth, using it to inspire others in the corporate world to prioritize ethics over earnings. His journey was featured in leadership courses and business schools as a case study in the power of personal transformation. Making amends. Richard didn't just change his professional path, he actively sought to make amends for his past mistakes. He established scholarships for former Neuralink Dynamics employees who had been affected by his decisions, funded mental health programs in communities harmed by corporate exploitation, and continued to engage in one-on-one conversations with those he had wronged. Their shared legacy. Together, Keanu and Richard's partnership became a powerful symbol of unity, resilience, and the belief that even the most broken relationships could be healed. The Unoya Resilience Model. Their collaborative model of combining cutting-edge technology with grassroots community engagement became the gold standard for mental health initiatives worldwide. Governments, NGOs, and private companies adopted the Unoya Resilience approach, blending innovation with empathy to address complex social challenges. Inspiring the next generation. Keanu and Richard's story inspired a new generation of leaders, entrepreneurs, and changemakers. Their journey was documented in films, books, and documentaries, not as a tale of corporate rivalry, but as a testament to the power of forgiveness, growth, and shared purpose. The annual Unoya Resilience Summit. Each year, the Unoya Resilience Summit brought together leaders, advocates, and innovators from around the world to share ideas, celebrate successes, and continue pushing the boundaries of what was possible in mental health care. The summit wasn't just a professional gathering. It was a celebration of humanity's capacity for compassion and change. The final chapter. As the years passed, Keanu and Richard gradually stepped back from their roles, confident in the teams and systems they had built. But their bond remained strong, rooted in a shared journey that had transformed not only their lives, but the world around them. In their later years, they often met in quiet places away from the public eye, on a secluded beach, in a mountain cabin, or at a small cafe like the one where they had first reconciled. Their conversations were no longer about business or projects, but about life, growth, and the simple joys of human connection. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, Richard turned to Keanu. "Did you ever think we'd end up here?" he asked, a hint of wonder in his voice. Keanu smiled softly, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "Life has a funny way of bringing us to where we need to be." Richard nodded, his heart full of gratitude. "I'm glad it brought me here, with you." They sat in comfortable silence, the waves crashing gently in the background. In that moment, there were no CEOs, no tech moguls, no global movements. There were just two men who had learned that the greatest success wasn't in the empires they built, but in the hearts they touched and the lessons they learned. The legacy lives on. Long after Keanu and Richard were gone, their legacy continued to thrive. Humiliates and the Resilience Foundation remained at the forefront of global mental health initiatives, led by a new generation of compassionate leaders inspired by their story. But their true legacy wasn't in the institutions they left behind. It was in the millions of lives they touched, the barriers they broke, and the hope they inspired. Their story became a timeless reminder that no matter how far we fall, we can always rise, that even in our darkest moments, there is light, and that the most powerful force in the world isn't technology or wealth. It's the simple, enduring power of kindness.